So in sub-Saharan Africa, for every 3,000 cancer patients, there is only one oncologist. Whereas in the US, there's one oncologist for every 300 patients with cancer. Generative AI will affect every part of the patient journey, from diagnostics through treatment, through follow-up, and through population health. Generative AI startup that is building out an ambient listening solution, which is currently in production, so it's being used today. It's 32% more accurate than GPT-4. So a clinician can say, so tell me about this patient, it will give a potted summary. Not only that, they can extract data from the electronic medical record for coding. AWS wants to democratize access to foundation models. So during the pandemic, the COVID vaccination platform was built out natively on AWS and supporting 2.2 billion vaccination doses across the country. I've got great respect for the Indian health tech ecosystem. I think it's an incredibly rich, and this is just part of the startup ecosystem that we see building. So I did my undergraduate pediatric training in Bangalore. And so I've got the highest respect for doctors in India because they were by far and away the best trained doctors I worked with. And there's actually a $230 million Generative AI Accelerator program for startups. There are startups building on AWS using Generative AI. We have another credit fund to support them. What keeps me awake at night is that we're not going fast enough. I think the technology is there and we need to accelerate. And a part of that is also education. So how can we make sure that our workforce globally and the partners who we work with can use the tools which are now available, because the technology has transformed so quickly. We have to make sure the workforce is educated. And so again, we have a workforce education initiative. We're training 29 million people around the world for free by 2025 in cloud computing skills, and specifically training 2 million people on AI cloud skills. So again, if we can educate the workforce of India to take on and leverage these tools, I will be happier because the whole cycle will go fast. My opinion is that we are seeing an incredible, dramatic shift to cloud. So globally, a big move in healthcare is moving in production systems onto the cloud at scale. So previously the cloud was used as disaster recovery, backup, run things on premises.
Correct.
And we're seeing systems, especially in this environment at the moment where security is highest priority, and we're seeing outages and bad actors and ransomware attacks. We're seeing a shift to organizations that have moved their production clinical environments. This is using clinical workloads with patient identifiable data as a cloud read-only move, first of all. So, okay, we're going to back up and have a cloud read-only version. We're going to run things on premises. Mm-hmm. Then organizations are finding that their cloud version actually is more performant than on-premises. And so what they end up doing is then turning off their on-premises production and just running off the cloud. So for instance, with electronic medical records, we're seeing Tufts Medicine and Geisinger Health in the US now running their electronic healthcare record, Epic in this case, cloud native, so running in AWS. We're seeing New South Wales in Australia. They're moving the entire eHealth New South Wales, their single digital patient record for the entire state, onto AWS, running in production. And the same thing for imaging. So we're seeing the University of California Health Systems now running all of their imaging platform natively in the cloud. So I think this, and then genomics, of course. So genomics is one of the big data-heavy workloads. They can't manage that data workload on premises. They can't buy enough infrastructure to keep pace with the amount of information that's coming in. So there we're seeing, again, Genomics England, UK Biobank, running these workloads natively on AWS. So I think that is the first thing that we see, is this running in production. The second thing we're seeing is then analytics and this explosion of generative AI, but it is an end-to-end data story. I think that's the key. Both of these elements are really about data at its heart, and how can we extract the best meaning from the data that we collect. But the amount of data is now vast, and this is where generative AI comes in, is this understanding vast amounts of data, and often multimodal data, so not just one data type. How can we drive better insights in this multimodal data? AWS wants to democratize access to foundation models. So although we have a great relationship with Anthropic, we've invested into them, and we get early release of some of their models. So for instance, Claude 3.5 was available through Bedrock. We want to allow the widest selection of foundation models available. So Bedrock is such a great vehicle for that, because it could not only allow users to access foundational models through APIs, it also provides really good functionality like guardrails, so you can make sure that the answers that the LLM gives you are bound by your constraints that you can provide. It's highly secure, so that you can access these foundation models and enrich them with your own data without sharing your data with the model. That's the key part. And then Model Evaluator is also another really key function. So not only you may want to try the latest Claude Anthropic model, but you also may want to see how Mistral functions, or how one of the Titan models works from Amazon. And then the Model Evaluator allows you to actually set your parameters. So you're interested in speed, you're interested in cost and performance, or you're interested in accuracy. And so you can set which model characteristics are best suited to you, because we truly believe that there won't be one foundation model to rule them all. There'll be hundreds, if not thousands. And so we want to give choice to end users in the most secure way possible. When it comes to healthcare in particular, we've had some really good success with Claude and Bedrock in the healthcare space. So an example is what we're doing with Genomics England. So we're working with Genomics England to look at surveying all of the healthcare literature about associations between genes and pathology. And so they looked, so in Genomics England, they have biocurators. So they actually have people who look through all of the literature, and they look at all of the published genes that are associated with pathology and say, okay, so how can we understand in all literature what genes are associated with what? They used Bedrock, and they used Claude to do a global literature search. This is all of published literature looking for associations between genes and learning disability. And they discovered 20 new gene associations using Claude, and to understand there are actually these 20 new genes which can now be acted upon. So they're now exploring what can be done to then influence the outcomes of these gene associations which previously were not known. And again, that's the power of people say, well, so what about Gen AI? It's really that. It's the ability to interrogate large, massive volumes of data, which is almost beyond human comprehension, and make it human consumable. Yeah, we have hundreds of thousands of customers currently using our AI tools, so SageMaker, on AWS today. And so the way that we approach it, customers can leverage foundation models through Bedrock. So they don't necessarily build their own foundation models. They can leverage foundation models that have been pre-built and enrich them with their own data. That's a really fast way to use generative AI out the box. We have many, many customers who are building foundation models from scratch, and they leverage SageMaker and SageMaker Jumpstart, and they can also leverage our own silicon. So we're actually building our own silicon, which is much more price performant and also energy performant. So we've got specific chips, Trainium to train AI, and Inferentia to actually do inferencing. And we're finding a really large uptake of that. And again, I'm sure my colleague will be able to give you some more numbers in terms of utilization. I don't have those off the top of my head, but certainly we're getting a lot of interest in those two elements of the stack, but also the top level of the stack. So we're seeing a lot of adoption of Q. So Amazon Q is it's a solution. It's a generative AI solution which customers can adopt in their own environments, and Q can allow organizations to understand their own data better. So you have something like Q for QuickSight, which will allow organizations to use natural language prompts to then generate data analytics and dashboards, which is a really fascinating ability to scale up very quickly to use this technology. Yeah, so there are a couple actually. So I think there are some. So the ability to ingest auditory data, so conversations between doctors and patients, and then put them into a note format, which stops then the doctors having to have a conversation and then spend time making notes or typing into the computer and then looking up, talking, and then typing again. I think that ability for ambient listening, ambient voice as it's called, that's going to be game changing. So we released a service called Amazon Health Scribe, which is a service which we believe will power these ambient listening solutions in the future. So this was a service that we developed with Solventum, which is now 3M, but it's generally available for any developers who are building these ambient listening solutions. AWS Health Scribe, we think, will be the engine that drives them. And that's going to be really exciting. That solution, that ambient listening solution, we have customers who are already building out these things. So a partner called Deep Scribe is a generative AI startup that is building out an ambient listening solution, which is currently in production. So it's being used today. It's 32% more accurate than GPT-4, which is really impressive. So that's one use case. Another use case is clinical summarization. So again, the challenge that doctors have when they come and see a new patient is, who is the patient? What have they had done? What are the test results? What do they need to know? Especially when it comes to handover, having a really good clinical summary is essential to reduce patient errors. And so there's a company called Pieces Technology, P-I-E-C-E-S, Pieces Tech, that has developed a clinical record summarization tool that sits on top of the electronic medical record, which allows summarizations to be generated on the fly. So a clinician can say, so tell me about this patient, it will give a potted summary. Not only that, they can extract data from the electronic medical record for coding. So again, a big challenge for health systems is how they can understand what procedures have taken place, what consumables have been used in order for billing appropriately. Because health systems have to understand what everything costs. So Pieces Tech can also understand the coding underlying the things that have taken place. And the final thing it can do is then the clinical discharge notes. So as a junior doctor, I spent a lot of time writing the discharge summary for patients. It takes a lot of time. Pieces Tech, actually, the application using generative AI can produce a discharge letter like this. And then it can be reviewed by the doctor. So again, all of these tools are being used with doctors. It doesn't replace doctors and what they do. This is automation of functions which take a lot of time, and it allows doctors to then focus on the important point, the patients themselves, and it reduces the heavy lift. So these are just some examples of where we're seeing things in production. So Pieces Tech is live today. It can be used. It's done over 2 million patient summarizations in production. And so again, and this is just part of the startup ecosystem that we see building. So again, this is what we want to do. We want to democratize access to all of these models and allow them to flourish. The third kind of area I think is very exciting is empowering patients and bridging the health gap and the knowledge gap. Because again, a problem that we see globally is inequity of access to care. And so patients want to understand their own health journey. And so there's a great startup called Huron AI. And Huron AI built an application which enables patients who have cancer to engage with cancer pathways in a way that the patient understands. So language specific, culturally specific, and cancer specific. And so what Huron AI is able to do is able to take the local guidelines for cancer pathways and use that as a retrieval augmented generation prompt. So you take all the guidelines for a local region, you then enrich it with a large language model, which is language specific. And then that will allow patients to interact with those guidelines to understand their pathway. And so it's incredible. They're able to do Hispanic guidelines in Latin America. They can do local language guidelines in Uganda, enriched by the local guidelines of cancer guidelines in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, because we have a real challenge, so in sub-Saharan Africa, for every 3,000 cancer patients, there is only one oncologist. Whereas in the US, there's one oncologist for every 300 patients with cancer. And so this really democratizes access to the guidelines and the appropriate treatment for patients, but it can also give the information to patients in the level of educational attainment they have. So you can say, give me the guidelines in a way that it will be understood by a 10-year-old, and you can actually respond in a culturally appropriate, educationally appropriate way. It's the power of the technology to democratize access to understanding is incredible. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I've got great respect for the Indian health tech ecosystem. I think it's an incredibly rich and exciting space to be in. So we've got great health tech companies that are already building on AWS across India. One of my, being a radiologist by background, Cure AI is one of my, I've been working with Cure AI for a very long time, and they've got a great product, and they're very much at the forefront of medical imaging. So medical imaging AI, I should say. So back in the mid 2010s, they were one of the first companies to come out on the scene with some really powerful technology. AWS is very privileged to be working with many very widespread Indian companies. So, for instance, the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in India. So we're working very closely with them. The Poshan Tracker in India, and also CoWIN. So during the pandemic, the CoWIN vaccination platform was built out natively on AWS and supporting 2.2 billion vaccination doses across the country. So AWS already supports the healthcare ecosystem delivery and the health tech ecosystem within India. So I think they're beautifully poised to leverage the technology that we are bringing in. And we are absolutely, really excited to start working with them at scale. So again, I know within the Indian technology, ecosystem, the appetite for generative AI is really high. I think all of the areas that we just discussed, the examples that I gave, are going to be relevant for the Indian population as well. I think the care gap, the health inequity that we see globally, this isn't an Indian problem, this is a global healthcare problem, can be addressed by these generative AI tools. As I explained, I think that to be language appropriate, and again, given the breadth of languages across India, using large language models, I think can address this issue of language. Culturally sensitive information and educational attainment, I think all of these areas will be entirely relevant. Also, we're working with EchoCare, and as part of the National Digital Health Mission. Again, I think that's going to be very exciting. I think there's lots of opportunity there where we can bring generative AI solutions in. But I think generative AI will affect every part of the patient journey, from well patients who want to interact with health systems to really make them understand access to services, I think through diagnostics, through treatment, through follow-up, and through population health. I think every bit of the patient journey can be aided with automation using generative AI.
Got it. And also you mentioned about, disparity in terms of number of doctors and patients across departments.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, again, I think in the doctor, again, I did my undergraduate pediatric training in Bangalore.
Wow.
And so I've got the highest respect for doctors in India, because they were by far and away the best trained doctors I worked with. And so having that experience, in the field in India, again, there are big disparities in terms of urban centers and rural areas. But again, that's it's not unique. So we see the same thing in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, where urban centers tend to have a greater concentration of doctors than rural areas. Again, I think democratizing access to care using technology will be really important.
segments?
Again, so everything I've discussed now is healthcare and healthcare delivery and health technology. What we're talking here about life sciences and drug discovery and innovation taking place there. So you just mentioned the first biological foundation model that was launched on AWS. That was absolutely fantastic. I think where the foundation models, the current language foundation models, and the ability to synthesize large bodies of text to make sense in it consumable, the same thing will happen with biological foundation models. And if you think about DNA in the same way you think about language, here we have a foundation model which is basically going to be assessing protein and will allow, and again, they'll be using an open source foundation model through the company, and it's going to be transformative in terms of the ability to build new molecules, so synthetic biology, to come up with new constructs to address disease entities. Really exciting, and again, we can link you to the press release because again that came out.
Yeah.
And again, it's great. The Matt Garman's press release, very exciting. But we're working with 9 of the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies are platformed on AWS, and so the likes of Pfizer, Amgen, Merck are all building out drug discovery platforms using AWS technology for that reason, because we can bring security as the bottom line and scale and the computing power. And so, for instance, Pfizer estimates that they're going to see cost savings between, so again, there are 2 elements to it. One's the speed of discovery, and the other thing is the ability to reduce cost, because the time to market is going to be so much shorter, and the number of people that have to do physical reviews and looking at all of whenever a drug is put through any regulatory process, it takes a vast amount of time to put all this content together. So they estimate they're going to save between $750 million and $1 billion through using generative AI. And so, Amgen's another example, where work's underway to build generative AI solutions to accelerate drug discovery using Bedrock and the technology we're bringing out. So again, highly exciting. We've got a $50 million generative AI accelerator that we launched. So again, that's a pot of money for cloud computing credits. So if there are Indian technology companies that want to leverage AWS, this is a specific fund which can accelerate the development of generative AI solutions. We're actually setting up AWS generative AI innovation centers. We're actually putting $100 million into the development of Gen AI innovation centers globally. And there's actually a $230 million generative AI accelerator program for startups. And so again, if there are startups building on AWS using generative AI, we have another credit fund to support them. So AWS really is doubling down on generative AI globally. We want to accelerate the broadest and richest ecosystem of companies that are building, with the end goal being better care and better outcomes for patients. So this isn't, from me personally, this isn't just a technology play. We have to be mission focused. So if we can support the mission of the life sciences companies and healthcare organizations across India, then I think we've done a good job. And so for more insights and insight, think AIM.